Tolerance is an elusive concept, and it certainly keeps me preoccupied and thinking. After publishing The Boundaries of Liberty and Tolerance in 1994, and subsequently Speech, Media and Ethics in 2001, second edition 2005, I started writing In the Scope of Tolerance. This book that you see here, the book is dedicated to two friends who died prematurely. The first is Guy Schwartz. Guy was a friend of mine at the UCLA Faculty of Law, dear friend, excellent researcher, and he died much too young. And the second is Rafi Livni. Rafi was a neighbor of mine. I was on the second floor of an apartment building. He was on the third floor. And we grew up together. And Rafi went to study medicine, and being a very conscientious man and human rights activist, he didn't want to spend his time working usual in Israeli hospitals. He went to Africa and volunteered to help people there. He said that they need me far more than the Israelis need me here. So he went to Africa, and he came back and forth between Africa and Israel, and was about to leave for Africa again when he went on his motorcycle to see his girlfriend and was hit by a car. He also died prematurely, far too young to die. So the book is dedicated to memory of these two people whose life were taken prematurely. They've done great good for many people. They should be remembered. The book itself starts with an opening chapter about the scope of tolerance. It's a philosophical chapter. And then there are two chapters about the right to privacy, in which I set some ground rules to privacy and what is allowed and what is not allowed when you, as a media reporter, cover the private lives of individuals. And then take on board case studies from the United Kingdom and Canada. United Kingdom concerns Princess Diana, a person who captivated the hearts of many millions, not only in the UK, all over the world, including mine. And the second case is concerned with a young lady, Pascal Aubry, who was sitting in a mall. A photographer saw her and took a picture of her and put it at the front of a magazine. Aubry learned about this only when her schoolmates told her about this, and to their surprise, she was surprised. Then they realized she had no idea that her face is on the cover. And she sued the publisher for invasion of her privacy. So I'm looking at these two cases from the UK and Canada. Then there are two chapters about offense. I am one of the few scholars in the world, I think, who takes offense very, very seriously. And I think that sometimes offense is more on a par with physical harm. And it supplements to a large extent the harm principle from John Stuart Mill. So there are two chapters that explain the issue of offense and when it should be taken seriously. I make the examination by a survey of Israeli Supreme Court judgments that were petitioned on the grounds of offense. So I wanted to see to what extent using that ground was justified. From offense, I moved to incitement. Incitement should be taken very seriously, and indeed it does all over liberal democracies. In the world of liberal democracies, in all of them, without any exception, incitement is outside of the law. When there is a close proximity between harmful speech and harmful action, to the extent that you don't know when the speech ends and when the action begins. So there's a direct link between the speech and the action. This is incitement, and it should not be allowed. Chapter 7 is about hate speech in Canada, and I look how Canada has changed its perspective towards Holocaust deniers and the likes, hateful people, anti-Semitic. Canada learned from the mistake that it did at first when they didn't know how to deal with this then new phenomena. And I show how the Canadian establishment, politicians, and the legal administration fought against hate speech in Canada. The last two chapters are about media coverage of terrorism. There is a relationship between terrorism and the media. Unfortunately, terrorism sells. And because it sells, then we see time and again sensational coverage of terrorism that doesn't help and support liberal democracies. So I speak about the paradox that we have flourishing press, flourishing media, because they live under the guise of liberty and tolerance that enable them to flourish. And then the media, due to ratings, sensational motivation, and so on, give the platform, the tools for terrorism to undermine democracy. So I'm trying to outline what should and should not be allowed when the media cover terrorism. It's a very practical chapter that should be of interest to media reporters who have the task, this delicate task of covering terrorist events. And finally, I'm giving an example of wrong relationship between media and terror, taking on board a case that happened in Canada. And this is the FLQ crisis in 1970, which exemplify all the wrong of media when they don't know where to pose red lines for coverage, when they do not understand that if they just inflame the situation by irresponsible reporting, this is not going to redeem anything. It's just going to escalate things. And indeed, to the extent that the Prime Minister of Canada at that time had to invoke the National Guard to go to the streets of Quebec in order to control the situation. Without the involvement of the media, I do not think that things would have escalated to the extent they did in the FLQ crisis. This chapter benefited from exploring archives in Canada dealing with the FLQ crisis that were just opened. And I think that I was probably the very first person who was allowed to look at the protocols, government protocols and police protocols from that period of time. So this chapter is built on original primary sources that were discussed for the first time. This is an interesting book for people who are interested in media ethics, in free speech, in tolerance, These are the main topics of this book. I hope you'll find interest. Happy reading. Thank you.